Okay, so first of all, I have a friend out in the audience, and she was like, there's like 5 people here. Just calm down. You're a liar, Laura Mays. So I want to say first, wow, it sounded like an earthquake. That was awesome. I want to say first, yeah, it's just me. Okay, I want to say first that I am a 5th generation Texan, which is something I am thank you. It is something I'm very proud of. It also means that I can curse like a badass. And that's why I'm going to go ahead and tell you, like right now, if you're not familiar with my work and you are easily offended, you should leave and I will not judge you. Seriously, I try to pull all of the F words out as much as possible, but I can get all of them because there's a lot. I do want to say also that Ann Richards was famous for saying, do not be embarrassed about your language. I've either heard it or I can top it. So it's a lot like Ann Richards. I also want to say that I have really severe anxiety disorder, and I take medication for it, and I may have taken a little too much, which technically means I am legally high right now. And I'm gonna blame that on what's about to happen next. When I first got here, I didn't really, I was utterly unprepared. I had no idea what I was supposed to talk about. I had no idea, because everything kind of got caught in my spam filter. And so I got here and they were like, so everybody in the keynote talks for about 15 minutes, but not you. And I was like, oh, thank God. They were like, yeah, you got 20 minutes. So like, really? I have nothing. And so I thought, you know what I'll read you a story about like a quintessential Texas story, which is a story from my book, which looks weird because this is the European version and I couldn't find the English version, sorry, or the American version. I guess they still speak English. Just to give you kind of a little bit of background, I grew up in very rural West Texas. Extremely poor, although we didn't really know that we were poor because we were very happy. My father was and is a professional taxidermist, so just basically blood and entrails everywhere. My mom's a lunch lady, it still is, and I grew up with bobcats living in the house and raccoons as pets and bread sack shoes to wear to school because we couldn't afford like real winter shoes, and that's totally normal. And everybody who's not from Texas is gonna, as I read this, they're gonna be like, what is wrong with you? And everybody from Texas is gonna be like, yeah, nailed it. Or not. So I'm gonna read a very abridged chapter of my book, which is, you know, everybody that was out here was so like inspiring and fascinating and very like, be good with your words and your deeds and I'm just going to say vagina a lot is basically what's about to happen. So get prepared for that. All right, so the title of this chapter, which is from my book about my life, and it is called, If You Need an Arm Condom, It Might Be Time to Reevaluate Some of Your Life Choices. I was the only goth chick in a tiny agrarian high school. Students occasionally drove to school on their tractors. Most of my classes took place in an ag barn. It was like if Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies showed up in a Cure video, except just the opposite. I purposely chose the goth look to make people avoid me since I was painfully shy, and I spent every free period and lunch hiding in the bathroom with a book until I finally graduated, and it was totally shitty. The end. Updated. My editor says this is a terrible chapter, and she doesn't even know what the hell an ag barn is, which is kind of weird for her. I mean, ag barn is short for agriculture barn, and it's the barn where they teach you all about boll weevil eradication classes. And I wish I was joking about that, but I'm totally not. You could also take classes in welding, animal husbandry, cotton judging and cultivation, and another class that I don't remember the name of, but we learned how to build stools and fences in it. I'm fairly sure it was called Stools and Fences 101. None of this is made up. Updated again. My editor says this is still a terrible chapter and that I need to flesh it out more. I assume by flesh it out, she means recover a bunch of awkward memories that I've invested a lot of time repressing. Fine. My ag teacher told us once years ago a student was hanging a cotton judging banner on the ag barn wall when he fell off the ladder and landed on a broomstick which went right up his rectum. The idea must have really stuck with my teacher because he was forever warning us to be constantly vigilant of any stray brooms in the area before getting on the ladder. And truly, to this day, I cannot see a ladder without checking to make sure there aren't any brooms nearby. This is pretty much the only useful thing I ever learned in high school. Oh, and I also learned firsthand how to artificially inseminate a cow using a turkey baster, but that was less useful and more traumatic, both for me and the cow. This is what we had instead of geography. For real, we had no geography, we had cow insemination. It's also why I can never get the blue pie when we play Trivial Pursuit. Updated again, my editor hates me and is apparently working in collusion with my therapist because they both insist that I delve deeper into my high school years. Fine, I blame this for this whole chapter. Be aware that you will probably have terrible flashbacks of high school when you hear this. You can forward your therapy bills to my editor. Let's start. Pretty much everyone hates high school. It's a measure of your humanity, I suspect. If you enjoyed high school, you were probably a psychopath or a cheerleader. Or possibly both. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. I tried to block out the memory of my high school years, but no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it's always with you, like an unwanted hitchhiker or herpes, I assume. Since I went to high school with all of the same kids who had witnessed my peculiar childhood, I had already given up on the idea of becoming popular and perky, so instead I decided to reinvent myself with a gothic wardrobe, black lipstick, and a look that I hope said, "You don't want to get too close to me. I've got dark, terrible secrets." Unfortunately, the mysterious persona I tried to adopt was met with a kind of confused and mildly pitying skepticism, since the kids in my class were already acutely aware of all my dark, terrible secrets, which is really not how secrets work at all. My classmates refused to take me seriously, and so I decided to pierce my own nose using a fishhook, but it hurt too much to get it all the way through, so I gave up and then it got infected, and so instead I wore a clip-on earring in my nose to school. It was larger than my nostril and I almost suffocated. Still, it was the first nose ring ever worn at my high school, and I wore it with a rebellious pride past the principal, who I'd expected would lock himself in the office immediately to stop the twisted sister-esque riots that would surely ensue at any moment from the anarchy unleashed from my nose ring. The principal noticed, but seemed more bemused than concerned, and seemed to be trying to suppress laughter as he pointed it out to the lunch lady, who was bewildered, and who was also my mother. And it was her clip-on. My mom sighed inwardly, shook her head, and went back to slicing Jell-O. Neither of us mentioned the incident or wore that earring again. And a lot of people tell me that everyone has these terrible high school experiences, and that's when I say, really? So the high point of your senior year was when you had your arm up a cow's vagina? And then they stopped talking to me. Usually forever. My sister Lisa never seemed to have any problems fitting in and distanced herself from me as best she could, while trying to convince me to join some school activities like everyone else. Lisa was in track, basketball, one-act plays, and had most recently been elected to be the high school mascot, a giant male bird named Wally. We were all quite proud of her, as the competition had been quite stiff, and she took her new role very seriously, practicing bird attack maneuvers in full costume in the living room. We waited for our parents to get home from work, and I'd watch and give her pointers about her technique. "Try to shake your butt wing more," I offered helpfully. "Tail feathers," she clarified with a surprising amount of condescension for someone wearing bird feet, her voice slightly muffled by the giant bird head on her shoulders. "They're called tail feathers, and if we're giving each other advice, maybe you could stop wearing black all the time. People think you're weird." "People think I'm weird because I wear a lot of black," I asked. "You're dressed as poultry." Lisa shrugged indifferently. "That may be true, but I was elected to dress as poultry, and when I walk down to the hall in my costume tomorrow, people will smile and high-five me. When you walk down the hall tomorrow, people will spit and avoid eye contact to keep you from putting voodoo curses on them." "Okay," I replied. "First of all, you can't even get real high-fives because you don't have any hands. And secondly, I would need to have someone's hair and nail clippings in order to put a voodoo curse on them." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Lisa yelled, pausing her bird routine to cross her wings in frustration. You shouldn't even know how to do voodoo curses. It's bizarre. Would it kill you to just try to be normal? Oh, I'm sorry. Could you repeat that last part I asked? I couldn't hear you through your giant damn bird head. Lisa huffily pulled the bird head off and seemed to be working on a lecture, but I really couldn't stomach the thought of someone in a bird costume telling me I needed to be more focused on fitting in, so I locked myself in the bathroom. After a few minutes, Lisa half-heartedly apologized through the bathroom door, probably because she realized that her hands were still covered in thick bird wings, and that I was the only person in the house who could unzip her costume if she needed to pee. It was cruel, but these are the risks you take when you choose popularity over opposable thumbs. Even so, the words of my sister were still ringing through my ear the next day at school, and I decided to make an effort to fit in, and that's how the peer pressure of a sibling in a bird costume led to me getting my arm stuck up in a cow's vagina. This is exactly why peer pressure is such a terrible thing. Frankly, this entire chapter could be an after-school special. The weirdest thing about me getting a cow pregnant when I was in high school is that I wasn't even enrolled in that class. And my editor actually made a note here that says, no, that's actually not even close to being the weirdest thing about you getting a cow pregnant. I'd taken most of my required classes in the first 2 years of high school, so I filled my last 2 years with easy electives, usually dallying in the ag barn, playing with dangerous power tools in the arc welder. The ag teacher noticed that I seemed a bit shiftless and offered to let me tag along and help with the animal husbandry class on their trip to the local stockyard. It was a small class of boys, all wearing tight Wranglers and cowboy boots, and against my better judgment, I took a deep breath and said, why not? As I nervously climbed into the small bus, I looked like a Metallica roadie who had just been won by Willie Nelson's tour bus. But the guys did their best to make me feel at home and seemed quietly impressed that I had volunteered to come along for the trip. It wasn't until we actually arrived at the stockyard that I realized that we were there to learn about artificial cow insemination. The teacher suggested that I help him since my arms were smaller and so it would, quote, be less uncomfortable for the cow. I wasn't entirely sure what constituted as helping, but it became clearer as he rolled a shoulder-length rubber glove up my arm. He slapped an open thermos of semen into my hand and sucked it up into the turkey baster. See, you weren't expecting this when you came here today, were you? Probably not. Underage girl, thermos of semen. This is fine. This is probably the point when I should have just run, but there was something about the way he was staring at me that made me stop. It was the look of a man waiting for a girl to run screaming so that he could have a good laugh at her at his expense. Or possibly it was the look of a man who wondered how he was going to explain to the lunch lady that he had to give her daughter all that semen because she was the only one around who could fit into the Arm Condom. It's hard to tell, but either way, it seemed like he expected me to bolt, and I'll be damned if I'm going to be judged by a man who carries around semen in a thermos. And that's how I ended up shoulder deep in a cow's vagina, squishing out the semen baster as a bunch of teenage boys looked on. It was the closest I had ever come to doing porn. Suddenly, the cow's vagina tensed unexpectedly, and I realized that my arm was stuck. I screamed involuntarily. The teacher panicked, thinking that the sudden contraction was an indication that the cow was going to sit down quickly, and told me to pull my arm out gently, because if the cow sat down, it would break my arm. This is disconcerting, both because it sounds painful and also because I broke my arm in a cow's vagina is something you never want to have to explain to anyone. I yanked my arm out, and the cow looked back at me in disgust, and that's when I realized I no longer had the turkey baster. So, yeah. This is the point when I would like to say that I gritted my teeth and said, I'm going back in with the focused determination of Bruce Willis in Armageddon, but instead I took a deep breath and I held my head up with what little dignity I could muster, and I slowly peeled off my glove and walked away. No one called me back, probably because none of them could find an elegant way to say, you left your turkey baster in that cow's vagina. Or possibly because they realized the first one to speak would probably be elected to take my place. I'm assuming someone went back in to retrieve the turkey baster for the cow's sake at least, but I don't know because I didn't stick around long enough to see. Instead, I walked off and waited until the rest of the class showed up. I was braced for the teasing to begin, but it never did. The guys looked a bit pale and shaky, but laughed at one another as they made vagina jokes. I always have to explain that. Bovine vagina, bovina. Come on, it's Texas! And my ag teacher patted my back reassuringly as we got on the bus. We returned to the school just as my sister was walking out of the gym from pep rally practice. She was still dressed as Wally and was waving her tail feathers with panache. She saw me and slowed down to walk beside me toward the school. And as we walked in silence, I realized that we could not have been a more awkward-looking couple. "What's up?" she asked carefully. "You look weird." "I took your advice about trying to fit in," I said, in a voice calmer than I would have suspected. "And?" she said. "And I got my arm stuck in a cow's vagina," I replied, staring off into the distance. Lisa paused momentarily and glanced at me with what I assumed was a look of disappointment, or possibly shock. Hard to tell when she had that bird head on. Then she walked on beside me, staring stoically into the surrounding cotton fields, as if a response to my statement could be found there. "Well," she said, pausing to find the right words, "that'll happen." She said it with a quiet sense of dignity, as if a small, wise Morgan Freeman were inside the bird costume with her, feeding her lines. "I almost lost an arm," I added conversationally, a slight hint of hysteria creeping into my voice. "I almost lost an arm inside a cow's vagina." It was a slight exaggeration, but at this point I was almost daring her to call me out, as I had started to regard a fair amount of this as her fault. She nodded carefully, her beak bobbing up and down, seeming determined to keep a normal tone of conversation. "Inside the cow's vagina, you say? Well, that's fascinating," she said, in the same tone that one might use to remark that the weather was about to turn cold, or that horses lack the ability to vomit. This is true, by the way. "So," she paused, "it's possible you may have misunderstood my advice." I glared at her. "But still," she said, "these are the moments high school memories are made of, right?" She held up her wings in what I'm assuming was her best version of jazz hands. "Yay for memories," she said weakly and somewhat apologetically. And then I punched her, but just in my head, because frankly, starting my day with my arm stuck in a cow's vagina and ending it decking someone in a bird outfit was too much even for me. But in a way, she was right. You should enjoy and appreciate your days in high school, because you will remember them for the rest of your life. Like when you're in prison or you're getting mugged at gunpoint, you can say to yourself, "Well, at least I'm not in high school." High school is life's way of giving you a record low to judge the rest of your life by. I know this because no matter how shitty it got, I could always look back and say, "At least I don't have my arm stuck up a cow's vagina." In fact, it's kind of become my life's motto. And I'm going to skip to the addendum, which is, because I had to skip like a lot of stuff because there was some really cursy stuff. But I'm going to skip to the addendum because it's one of my favorite things ever. And at first they were like, "We're not going to put this in there because there's no way this really happened." And I had to prove that it really happened. When I first wrote this chapter, I realized people would have a hard time believing it. So I found my former high school principal, and I sent him this email, which proves that I shouldn't be allowed to use email when I've been drinking. "Dear Mr. Hollick, I've been thinking of writing about artificial cow insemination, but the problem is that my memory sucks and I can't remember all the details, probably because I blocked it out or because of all the drugs I did in college. This is how I remember it: shoulder-length glove and a turkey baster up the cow's vagina. I would have sworn this is how we did it, but I know now the preferred method is to do it rectovaginally. Am I misremembering? Because I'm fairly sure if I had my arm up a cow's rectum, I would remember that. But then again, I'm having to ask my high school principal the details of getting a cow pregnant, so obviously my memory is not entirely reliable. Do any pictures of this exist? I realize this is probably the weirdest request you've ever received from a former student, and I apologize for that. I also apologize for sending you an email with the word rectovaginal in it. I can assure you I never saw that coming either. Hugs, Jenny." Immediately after sending the email, I realized how inappropriate it was, and so I called my sister Lisa and said, "So I may have just sent our high school principal an email with the word rectovaginal in it." And she was all, "Who is this?" And I was like, "No, seriously, that just happened." Oh, and he's also my cousin. I should add that as well. And after she stopped banging her head on her desk, she pointed out that I had learned nothing from her advice, and she agreed that I should probably call his secretary and ask her to delete the email from the account before she opened it. But it was too late because he immediately opened it and replied to it and seemed entirely unfazed. He assured me that practically no one was doing it rectovaginally back in the early 90s, which is true on so many levels. He also looked for photographs, but never found any, probably because no one ever takes pictures of underage girls with their arms up cows' vaginas, most likely because those pictures are more likely to end up in evidence folders rather than books about golden childhood memories. Thank you. And I am doing some sort of a breakout thing, which I'm way even less prepared for, but I'm basically going to be talking about this, the idea that these horrible, terrible moments in our life, the ones that we want to forget ever happened, the ones that we want to pretend never happened, those are the moments that make us us. And to embrace them and celebrate them and say, I'm weird and flawed and messed up, but in the best possible way. Nobody else is messed up like I'm messed up. And to be proud of that, and a little ashamed, but then more proud. The end.